Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope everything is going great and the week is good. And if not, well, maybe I can help you forget for a little while. So, in this video, I have just a bunch of stories that I had collected and I had done, but they didn't really fit into one of the longer videos that I do. So I figured I'd put them all together in this little compilation here, and I hope you enjoy it. So pull up a stump, and yeah, thank you for watching. So this is something that happened to me about 6 years ago. My husband was made redundant at his job, and to help pay the bills until he got another one, I took a night job that seemed perfect. All I had to do was sleep in the house with two young children and get them ready for school the next morning. It meant extra money and didn't interfere with my day job. At first this was not too bad, except that the children had been adopted out of a pretty bad abuse and tested me really hard, pushing all my buttons. Sometimes I would leave crying because they were so hurtful, but I never blamed them, and soon came to really love them. One day, their adoptive mother told me that she had a guest over who told her that one of her girls was sitting on the stairs. She thought that was weird because they were both in bed and asleep. The younger one did sleepwalk sometimes, so when she went to check and they were both in bed, she thought that that must have been what happened. This was weird, but not inexplicable. That was a Friday night. On Monday, when I showed up to stay with the kids, she told me that there was a ghost in the house, but it was not threatening. I kind of laughed because I didn't believe in ghosts, but she told me about her friend and said that they had also seen a little girl sitting on the stairs after she had put her children to bed that night. I wasn't concerned as it seemed like nonsense to me. The next morning, as I was helping the girls dress, I saw a sparkly little girl run out of the closet and then down the hall and down the stairs. I told myself that I was just tired and seeing things. It had been a rough night with both girls having nightmares, and I had not gotten much sleep. I didn't say anything, and we had no more strange sightings that week. When I returned Monday evening, the mom told me that the little girl had been there all weekend, but only when she was alone. I was not afraid and told her that I had seen something a week earlier. We both agreed that whatever it was not threatening and we would not talk about it in front of the children. That night, a picture in the front hall bounced off its hook and the glass smashed. No one was on the main floor when it happened. The hook was still in the wall, and the wire was intact. This was the beginning of the horrible things happening in that house. The next night, I was sound asleep when I felt all the hair in my body stand on end, like a blanket of static electricity was hovering over my bed. I laid still, frozen with fear, until the girl's little dog came running in the room and growled. The feeling disappeared instantly, and I got up to check the little girls who were asleep, but very restless. I sat with them until they had settled back down and took the dog to bed with me. There was nothing more that night, but in the nights following, when I came into the house, I could tell what kind of night it was going to be. Sometimes the house felt quiet and empty, and other times there was a menacing atmosphere. I often felt static energy in the air, heard soft whooshing noises, but never again saw the little girl. Instead, one night while watching TV, the girls were asleep upstairs. I saw a gray, smoky mass roll slowly down the stairs. It had tiny dull sparkles in it, and it moved as if it was a contained mass. It rolled down the stairs and gathered into a ball, slowly slid around the banister at the bottom, moved a few inches, and then disappeared. When I got up the courage to look down the hall to see if there was anything there, I could see nothing. This was very close to where the picture had fallen from the wall. The next morning, while serving the children breakfast, one of them ran up the stairs to use the washroom, even though the powder room was right across the hall from the kitchen. I asked her why she had not used it, and her response froze me. I don't like the voices. I never used that powder room again. The next months were hell. I took the dog to bed with me every night, left the bathroom lights on, and almost every night the girls came in and crawled into bed with me. They had horrible nightmares. No one mentioned anything strange. We just didn't talk about it. One night, I went to the front door to receive a parcel. I took it through the living room, and when I looked back at the hall, there was a man I had worked with, standing there. He was not quite solid, but I could see his features plainly. Even the butterfly bandage he wore over the tattoo on his neck when he was at work. I gasped. Then he disappeared. Now I really wanted to leave, but I could not bear to abandon the children who I had grown to love. I had not said a thing to anyone about what was happening. The struggle with the little girls was bad enough, and my husband and adult daughters thought that I was upset because of them. I was, but that was only part of it. Finally, after months of this, I was sitting in front of the TV when I heard rustling noises from a large plant in the corner of the room. The dog stared at the plant and started to growl. Something in me snapped. I slammed both my palms hard into the coffee table and yelled, "Enough!" The noises stopped. The house felt clean and calm. I don't know what was happening in that house. I never felt any fear or presence again as long as I stayed with them. I did some searching online but could find nothing to indicate any crime or violence that had happened there. I cannot tell you the relief I felt when they moved and I could sleep soundly again. The girls' nightmares ended. Many of their behavioral problems disappeared, and they never complained of voices again. I love those kids. They went through unbelievable abuse and had so much trouble trusting people. I couldn't abandon them. What I found so weird was, I grew up in a really old house. The part that was my bedroom was built in the early 1800s, and I know that people died in there, but there was never any bad or heavy feeling. The place I described to you was a relatively new townhouse. It didn't make any sense. At first I thought that maybe it was something to do with the girls and their abuse. I even tried to convince myself that it was bats. I'll take bats any day. I don't know what it was, and I'm perfectly content not to know. I won't even drive past it anymore. Having experiences like you did in that house makes you wonder, why can't they leave? Or is it just residual energy? I prefer to believe that it's just energy. The other is too horrible. So I'd like to say thanks again for sending in that great story. I don't remember if you want it to remain anonymous or not, so I'm just going to say your first name. So I want to thank Miriam for sending that story in. It was really nice to hear, and it just kind of has a wholesome feel to it, don't you think? So back in high school, this would have been my senior year, my girlfriend of 2 years cheats on me, and it hurts unbelievably bad. And I'm not thinking straight, so I decide to end it all. My family doesn't have any guns, and I have none myself, so I take a rope and head out into the woods. Long story short is that I hang myself. I remember the world going dark, and then nothing. And then I'm waking up. I'm shaking like crazy since it's early February in friggin' Vermont of all places. I'm not sure how long it's been, but I'm lying on the ground with the rope beside me. It somehow came untied, which seems weird, and I'm still just like, it is freezing out here, so I decide not to try again that night. My warm cozy bed is now calling me. I head home, I get in bed and I drift off to sleep, and I have the weirdest dream. My uncle who recently died is in it. He was one of the only people who ever looked out for me. Without getting too much into it, my parents aren't exactly the best people, so my uncle kinda helped raise me. One of the only people in my family that I actually liked, and he died last year. In my dream, I'm a kid again. We're chilling on my uncle's porch. We used to do that a lot, and my uncle would tell me stories. This time we're just sitting there staring at the woods, and finally he turns to me and says, "One thing. You owe me one." And then I wake up. It's the next morning. The dream is still vivid in my mind, and it feels super heavy. I decide to man up and get over whatever my problems were. I decide to make my uncle proud. I start to lift weights and just get in shape. I pick up some other hobbies and dedicate myself more to school too. I graduate and work my way through school, and I just got my bachelor's degree this spring, and I'm starting my master's program soon. Not sure if my failed suicide and the dream were a coincidence, but I didn't feel like it. Thanks, Uncle Tim. I miss you. So this happened to me and my friend, circa 2006 or so. We were at a small, poor fisherman village near a river at the Colombian Pacific coast. It's very dense and humid tropical jungle. The sun is almost down, and we're all tipsy after having a few beers. We decide to visit the tiny local cemetery on our way to the campsite. We're just giggling at funny and misspelled names on the tombstones. A couple hours later, it starts to rain, hard AF, so we're just getting ready to go to sleep. But all of a sudden, we hear something moving really fast. It goes from the main stone road to where we are, like 20 feet away. Our tent is over a wooden platform held up by pillars, and nothing but plants, rocks, etc. are below us. This thing, whatever it is, zigzags through the vegetation very rapidly between the pillars, and not at a normal speed. No animal or person can move that fast. And all of a sudden, it hits really hard against one of the wooden columns, and everything goes silent. And then it's just pouring rain. We have no idea what's going on. My friend is also kind of skeptical, but we're both just as terrified. So a few seconds or minutes pass by, and then it does the same thing again, and then again, and we just stay there listening. After this thing repeating several times, all we can hear is rain falling. We lie down on our sleeping bags and continue to listen. After a while, I hear it again coming from the road. It's down below the structure, but there's no zigzag this time. The next thing I hear is like a small nail or claw slowly scratch the wooden planks, right below where my ear was. I jump back, scared as hell, and I say, "Did you hear that?" And my friend's asleep, so I spend the rest of the night listening while my friend snores. My brother-in-law works repairing gas ducts, since we have a big problem with people in criminal organizations stealing gas. Lots of these ducts are in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes he or his co-workers would see or hear weird stuff, from will-o-wisps, we call them bruja here, since people believe that witches can turn into balls of fire and fly away. They hear weird noises like weird-sounding laughs or whispers in places where no one lives, weird shadows, and even seeing big animals like giant wolves, giant birds, or black cats. They prefer not to talk about it since they believe that it could attract more weird phenomenon and actually become life-threatening to them. Friends of some friends try to make a documentary to a town next to mine for a college project. The place that the town is used to be famous for UFO and cryptid sightings. Many people say it's because the area is surrounded by 7 extinct volcanoes. And when camping, the guys told us they could feel like they were being stalked by something. They felt watched the whole time. One night, they could hear a big creature walking around their tent and doing low-pitched growls. For context, the biggest wildland creature in the area that could growl are coyotes or feral dogs, but they told us that by how the strut sounded, the thing was at least as big as a bear. They think it could be a witch doctor or a shaman living near that wanted to scare them away. They never mentioned this in public appearances about the documentary. I know this is some kind of friend of a friend story, but I think it's interesting anyways. So I asked my mother about creepy shaman stories, and she told me 2 of them. The first one is from my father's friend, or FF to be short. So he was a diver, and they're participating in an operation cleaning the Bicol Lake. As FF comes to shore, the locals say to not disturb the waters and keep the things at the bottom as they are, and he just pretty much disregards this as he's being paid to do a job, so he goes to do it. So it's diving time. They find many tires, trash, and even a couple of vehicles. And at this point, he's thinking that it feels pretty good to help the environment like this. So another car is pulled up, and they open the trunk, and there's a dead body in chains inside. The car is really old, and the body is in unusual clothes. They call the police, and the locals pull up. The locals say that the dead body is in fact an evil shaman, or witch. My mother wasn't quite sure how to call her. She kept the nearest villages in absolute terror. So eventually some brave men put her in the trunk and sent her to the bottom of the lake. And he thinks that's definitely just a story and you guys murdered somebody. But the police can't do anything since it's a remote place and the case of murder is way too old to seek for the guilty. The job is done, so he's just gonna go back home. And he mysteriously gets very sick for a whole month. A high temperature, a fever, blood pressure, and seizures. All the crewmates that he was with start to die off one by one, and medicine isn't helping him. There's only one thing left he can think of to do. He visits another shaman to ask for help. The other shaman does his job. He calls to the spirits and he puts a magical defense in place, and miraculously, he gets better. My granddad told me these stories once. Something terrified my mother's side of the family for damn near 2 generations, but never actually hurt anyone. Just really loved scaring the hell out of people and livestock. They lived at, well, what's now my granddad's. So one story goes that my granddad, as a young man, was riding through the woods on a horse and buggy at night with my Uncle M, and there's like a lantern and stuff, and it's like really comfy and all that. The horse and buggy is just rolling along, and they hear something moving behind the wagon. My uncle stops the wagon, and something else stops. They look back, but it's outside the light, and they don't see any eyes. They start moving, and it starts moving too, so they stop again, and it stops. One of them cocks the shotgun. They start moving again, and it starts grinding and snapping its teeth. They hurry the horse into the backyard, and it stops at the tree line. And this ties in later with an interesting detail, so bear with me. After that night, the animals start acting strange. They're out grazing during the day, free to roam, and around 3 p.m. they all, as a group, come back to near the house despite it not being feeding time. Every day this happens, for months. They seem nervous or something, but they don't lose any weight or anything that would show signs of it. They don't become unhealthy or anything despite the stress that they're clearly under. They just leave the woods at a certain time every day for really no reason at all. There was even this one time when everything cleared out of the woods. The livestock, their deer cleared out of the woods, coyotes, foxes, rabbits, everything scrammed. It was really weird seeing predator and prey all fleeing together like that. But the family, being strong country rednecks, they don't really give a damn. After months of this, my granddad, his cousins, and my uncle all go out coon hunting. They got the dogs with them. There's a pretty big mutt breed and some kind of hounds that they have with them to take hunting. They don't see anything sketchy about this. They're hunting for hours and don't find anything. But the dogs are barking and sniffing around the whole time. The dogs stop at some point and go full alert. The armed men stop and do the same, and the dogs just stand there and then bolt. The men, deciding they're not one to be depicted as horror film characters, do the same. and then they hear it behind them. It sounds like it's on 2 feet. It's not galloping, but running. And they make it back to the house and run in, and they say, "Ma, there's some weird stuff going on out there." Silence. Everybody's standing in the living room, tense. And then something slams onto the front deck. It sounded like it jumped off the roof. Then there's this loud scratch all down the sidewall of the house, from side to side, almost like someone took a knife and ran down the boards with it. To be clear about what it sounded like, the boards are like lapped or overlapped with each other and not one smooth sheet. So everybody is obviously standing in the room just going WTF, and everything is super tense. Then the thing seems to move on, but then the animals in the barn start going absolutely wild, and at this point they think their livelihood is threatened. So everybody is strapped and everybody goes outside and starts creeping to the barn. The mules are so freaked out that they break out of the stalls and kick the door out and flee off into the woods. They can hear something moving around in the rafters. It had the high ground. Everybody aims and waits. They hear this thud a good 20 feet away, and then nothing. They go back inside and no one sleeps at all. Daylight eventually comes, and they gather the scattered animals and investigate. They find a footprint. In my granddad's words, it was hooved like a cow, but with claws like an eagle. That ain't no animal. Now it had 3 talons. Now go and look at the Bernie relief. Do you think it's a coincidence that a Mesopotamian artist put that little detail into relief? Then, thousands of years later, something with feet like that screws with my immediate ancestors, and later I get approached by said goddess in a dream. Maybe. But I think that's quite a coincidence coupled with everything else. It never hurt anyone. Nothing happened after that night until years later. So my mother, as a preteen, a poor family, shared a bedroom with her brother upstairs. They had a bed next to an open window because there was no AC and it was in the summertime. So they were sleeping, and something leans in through the window and breathes in their faces. She screams and runs downstairs like their lives depended on it. My grandmother, 5 minutes before this, is dreaming. A figure that she never described, and she's dead now, says, "Wake up, it's about to happen." And she wakes up, grabs and holds the screaming kids when they make it to her. Other little stuff around that time, there was like the porch door would swing when there was no wind and nobody had touched it. You would hear your name being called and nobody called you, just little things like that. Later on, that house got struck down by lightning and burned down. They rebuilt to its current house, and that was the last of it. Nothing else happened. So this happened one night when I was walking around the ship. It was night out, obviously, and the view was absolutely amazing. It was so nice to be outside in the middle of nowhere with just the light of the moon. I look off into the distance, and I see something, but I can't quite make it out. It's like when it's just out of view, but you can tell that there's something out there. I go ask the captain if the radar sees it. He says no, but he sees something too out there. We both concluded that it looked like that it was a ship. We tried the spotlight, but it was too far. We tried our air horn/speaker. We say, "Hello, is there anyone out there? Are you having trouble?" And all we hear in response is these loud clanks. It's not Morse code, it's just banging. So we ask for Morse code, and we just hear more banging, and there's still no Morse code. We try to keep a distance in case it's like a trap or something. And then suddenly, the banging stops, and now we hear what sounds like a full crew going into battle stations, which is weird because this thing only looks to be about 100 to 200 foot long boat at most. But we're at a distance, so this could just be echoes. We finally close in the distance and get close enough to shine our light. It's just a lost boat. It probably found its way there because the rope snapped. But upon closer inspection, it looks old. The paint is entirely stripped. There's holes everywhere. I dated it back maybe to the 1900s. What's crazy is that the anchor was down, but that could have just been rust. We tried the horn again. No answer. We tried to radio the nearest port. It's all staticky, but we eventually got through, and they said they would come check it out. By the time that we got back, the ship had disappeared. This happened back when I was around 15 or so. I was on this camping trip with my cousin, who was also 15, and my uncle. We were out on the way to the Oregon coast. We were driving in the back roads of Montana towards the mountains at around 6 p.m. The shadows are getting long, and the sun is getting low. At some point while we're driving, a storm brews, and it starts hailing silently while a steady wind stirs. I can hear my uncle swearing and murmuring something under his breath about the mountains at night. He says that we won't be at the campground until 10 at least, which was about 3,000 feet up the mountains. The road turns into twists and hairpin turns to the foothills, up around and over ledges and such things like that. The lightning begins to flash frequently. The wind is picking up now. My uncle is openly swearing. My cousin and I are beginning to get really nervous because of the weather. At this point, the scene is quite disturbing to us because of the dark skies, the steady cracks of hail, and the tossing of grass and the golden horizon aglow from the setting sun. The rain comes in gently, obscuring the horizon, and then suddenly comes down in sheets. My cousin points out that there's a church that's being illuminated by lightning and suggests that we stop there for shelter. My uncle is looking around, licking his lips and whispering to himself, telling us to keep an eye out for a driveway. Unfortunately, not very long after this, the road dips down into a valley, and we lose sight of the sporadically illuminated church. We come around a corner just as a cluster of lightning bolts go off, and somebody is kneeling on the road. We all scream, he slams on the brakes, and we sit there for a couple of seconds staring at the man. Then all of us pile out of the car to see just what the hell's going on. There's nobody there, but we found something just as spooky. The corner was much sharper than he thought, and it goes off a ravine rather quickly. There's several crosses and flowers tied to the mangled guardrail. My uncle shakily continues to drive along. We're driving much more slowly now. We fall into this eerie lull as we inch along carefully in the rain. Hours seem to pass, but we never come across this church. But creepily enough, we do drive by several ancient-looking gravestones and assortments of Polish, German, and Czech during a flat section. The rain never lets up, so my uncle pulls off to the side of the road, and he parks about 10 feet into the grass. We pull back the back seat and extract our sleeping bags. So we all sit there in the car, but nobody can sleep. I keep swearing that I can see figures drifting beyond the veil of rain. My uncle's whispering to himself again, appearing alert. Eventually the bolts of lightning stop, but the rain keeps hissing on. We start dozing off when my uncle starts up the car again, and he drives about 100 feet and then pulls off the road again. He looks at us and says that he just felt weird about that stretch of road. We all fall asleep at some point, because suddenly we realize that it's like 4 a.m., and the sky is so clear and the stars are shining brilliantly, and there's now this blanket of fog that's along the road. And when we clue in, we wonder why that we all woke up at the same time, and we look around, and back on the road, exactly where we were just parked, was a huge boulder, and several smaller ones, scattered along the road. There was a rock slide. My uncle keeps driving through the fog slowly, until the sun rises and burns it up. Something still just feels wrong. We keep driving until we realize that we never went up into the mountains, that we got turned around somehow. No, wait. We're on the other side of the mountains. The sun is behind us. We realize that we just went through the mountains in the middle of a storm. We cross the county highway and we check our map. Around 20 miles north of the pass that we were supposed to be taking to go through the mountains. And we're all thinking, what? We didn't turn anywhere. How did this happen? So, as always, let me know what you thought of those stories. Did you like them? Did you not like them? Do you think they were real? Do you think they were fake? Just let me know. And I hope you are having a good week. There should be another video on Sunday as usual. And tell me what you were doing this week. Part of my week was watching the NHL trade deadline and help looking after a family member. So, yeah, tell me what you were doing. And I will see you in the next one, which should be on Sunday. So yeah, thank you for watching once again, and I'll see you then.